Good evening, guys. Hold on for a few seconds to put my screen. Good evening. Welcome to the program. In this session, we are going to discuss about Incoterms. It is a short form for International Commerce Term, and the latest version is 2020. If you are in import, export, or international trade, you may be already aware about Incoterms, but I am trying to see whether I can provide some summary of the tool used in the international trade. Uh, Before that, let me introduce myself. My name is Pattabhiraman. This is my LinkedIn profile. You are always welcome to connect or follow my profile. My background is I am an engineer with post graduation in management as well as data science. I have nearly 2.5 decades working in this organization, and I have handled every subdomain in supply chain, including logistics. In the last 10 years, I was heading the supply chain function, and currently, I am heading the supply chain training organization known as Thoughtware Training. Coming to my certification, you should be aware if you are a supply chain and logistic professionals, the globally recognized certification from ASCM or APIX. The relevant certification for logistic is CLTD. This is certification in logistic, transportation, and distribution. If you are trying to enter corporate logistic or MNC companies, these type of certifications are really essential in the current environment. I also have a certificate from Demand Driven Institute. They are also relevant to supply chain certification. I am a certified supply chain professional and certified purchasing manager and a project management professional, also qualified in business analytics. Coming to our organization, we are based in Bangalore, 4-year old organization. We provide both consulting and training in the field of supply chain, logistic, and purchasing. And we operate with the trade name Expert SEM. Coming to the international trade, you should be aware how the transaction takes place and what are the cost involved and the risk involved. Maybe you are maybe aware that the local logistic doesn't pose big threat, but when it comes to international trade, there are a lot of factors which has to be taken care. Okay, let us examine a simple case of a movement or logistic international trade considering this Google map. Assume that your location is Bangalore, who is trying to import the goods, and there is a supplier based in Beijing. So there are possibly two ways, two modes are possibly either you may have to get it by sea or air. Air may be possible provided your consignment size and weight fits into the cargo size which aircraft can take. and the road and rail is not exactly possible with respect to China and India. Possible, China was trying to promote a Silk Route, which is absent nowadays. With respect to India, they are so bypassing out of India. So the only possible modes are sea and air. Assume we are going to ship the consignment through sea. It could be a container. So Beijing doesn't have a seaport, so it has to come to the nearest port. Possibly, if you consider Shanghai is a well connected port, it has to be shifted by road or rail by any means, and it has to come to Shanghai. Then it has to be loaded in a ship. It may come directly to Chennai, which could be the nearest coastal port for Bangalore. But you know that there are no direct frequent ship from Shanghai to Chennai. Of course, few routes are available. Also, there could be lot of transshipment on the way happening. Possibly, it could happen in Singapore or Colombo, and then reaching the Chennai. And in Chennai, like in the export, you need to do export formalities and import formalities here in when the consignment enters the Indian shores. Then there is a movement from Chennai to Bangalore. It could be by road or rail. Now you have to see what are the risk involved. Possibly the risk could be the damage to the consignment, or theft or pilferage. Such a thing could happen to the consignment. So you should be very clear who is going to take the responsibility. Even if there is a insurance, who is going to file the insurance claim, all that is a point here. And second thing is there are various cost element involved. Here you can see there is a local inland transportation from Beijing to Shanghai, and then there are activities related to material handling at the Shanghai port. Then export formalities, charges connected with that. Then there is a insurance. Then coming to the sea transport cost. Then in the custom clearance angle at the Chennai seaport, the consignment has to be custom cleared, so custom duty has to be paid. Then there is a local transportation cost involved. Possibly you are also going to engage a third party. He may be known as CFA, who is arranging all this activity. So there are so many cost element involved. So we should be clear what who is going to take care. Is it a buyer or a seller? Number one. Second is at what point the title of the goods or the ownership changes from the seller to buyer, and these things are very well defined in the Incoterms. In fact, Incoterms is a part of ICC, International Chamber of Commerce, which is more than 100 years old organization. They facilitate trade by defining these terms. Incoterms are defined by ICC. Okay, these are globally adopted in the international uh, trade, and many countries have adopted even as a legislation. You are always welcome to visit the site. You may be able to get some idea about how they are handling it. Some documents are available for free, but some you have to pay and get those documents. And they also have a mobile app you can download from any Android devices. You can see some of the definition or explanation of the Incoterms, which has been given here. Coming to what are the Incoterms rule, these are world's essential trade for sale of goods. Though it is used in all the modes of transport, some are specific for some mode, and also only few countries uses for domestic, whereas all the country uses it for international trade. Okay, so this may be a part whether you are filing a purchase order, packaging and labeling a shipment for freight transport, or preparing a certificate of origin at a port. The Incoterms are relevant there. It provides specific guidance to individual participating in the import and export of trade on a daily basis, and these are published by ICC, and it is a more than 100 years old organization. Okay, the latest version is 2020 version. All these Incoterms are grouped under 10 different heading as a obligation. What is the obligation with respect to seller, as well as the obligation related to buyer? So the obligation from the seller are identified by the points from A1 to A10, whereas in the case of buyer it could be from B1 to B10. And those 11 Incoterms are these, starting from X works, then FCA, which means free carrier. CPT is nothing but carried paid to. CIP is carriage, and insurance paid to. DAT is delivered at terminal. DAP is delivered at place. DDP is delivered duty paid. Then rules for sea and inland water way transport. So you can see the top seven ones are for any modes, and these four are specific for sea and inter water inland waterway transport, and US uses these terms even for inland transport. But you may see some of these terms are interchangeably used even in the international terms. For example, if we take FOB or CAF, we are using in the air transport. So there is a confusion still going on. What is relevant? Can you use it for domestic? And it is a voluntary service, and nobody is forcing you to adopt any of this standard. Coming to the grouping, these 11 terms are also grouped into four categories. One is closer to departure from the origin of the goods, that's where it's called X works. Whereas something group D is near to the customer. Possibly here you have to understand in terms, if you go for a X work, the seller has a minimum responsibility, and buyer starts picking up the consignment from the seller nominated place. It could be his factory or his warehouse, and all the risk and expenses are borne by the buyer. Okay, when it comes to other end, arrival means here we are talking in terms of a buyer. Here the responsibility of a buyer is minimum, and the seller is going to take a maximum responsibility in terms of risk as well as cost. But whatever may be the case, finally the seller is going to get this amount paid by the buyer. Here only we are going to make things clear who is going to take this activity, and then they are going to charge it in any case. But these things are to be clear in any purchase order or contract or a quote or a performer invoice. And there are some intermediate cases, those are called group C or group F. So you can have a different terminals which is in between, not at the buyer place or seller place, but at a intermediate point. We will briefly see about one term here. In fact, there is a detailed program available in our site, expertsem.com, and you can visit if you want to know the detailed explanation of these terms which are used in Incoterm. When it comes to X works, here the seller has the minimum responsibility, whereas the buyer is going to take majority of the activities. You can see in this picture, the buyer is represented by blue color, and seller is represented by blue color, and buyer is represented by yellow color. So buyer is taking the maximum responsibility, including the export formality at a foreign country and all related activity from picking up the consignment. So we will see some idea about this delivery and risk. X work means that the seller delivers the goods to the buyer. When it places the goods at the disposal of buyer, it can be a buyer's seller's warehouse or a factory. The named place may or may not be at the seller premises, and the mode of transport may be specified, because packaging is a responsibility of a seller, and the packaging could be different for air or sea transport or any other mode. So it is in the interest of buyer to specify and also fix the packaging, suitable packaging required. Then place or a precise point of a delivery should be clearly defined when we make the contract. Loading the risk: delivery happens and the risk transfer when the goods are placed not loaded. In the X works, even at a foreign location, the items are not loaded into the vehicle, buyer's vehicle. So buyer has to be very clear on this aspect. If at all you want a support from the seller, you can have a specific agreement with the seller to arrange this. Then export clearance: in case of a X works, it is a responsibility of buyer to arrange the export clearance, but seller may provide assistance where required. Coming next thing is obligation. In terms of seller and buyer, what are the related obligation? Seller must provide the goods and the commercial invoice in conformity with the contract of sale. That's where the responsibility is going to end for the seller, whereas buyer must pay the price agreed. Coming to the delivery, the seller must deliver the goods by placing them at the disposal of buyer at the agreed point. The buyer must take delivery and give the acknowledgement. Transfer of risk: here the seller bears all the risk of loss or damage of the goods until they are delivered. So it is almost nil risk to the seller, whereas buyer assumes the risk as soon as he takes delivery or possession of the goods. Coming to the carriage or the transportation cost, in X works, the seller has no contribution towards this, whereas buyer is going to make the payment. Coming to insurance, of course the seller has no role here, buyer has to arrange insurance. Then delivery, transport document, import export clearance, all these are taken care by the buyer. Of course seller can assist any support if a buyer wants them from the seller. Coming to checking, packaging and marking, of course this is the basic function of a seller. Even in the experts contract, he has to arrange for the packaging, checking and marking. And coming to the allocation of fund, seller must pay all the costs relating to the delivery of these goods to the buyer till it is being picked. But you see, this is a minimal cost coming to the buyer. Buyer assumes all the responsibilities here. Coming to the notice, maybe seller must give the buyer any notice needed to enable the buyer to take delivery of the goods. Like this, each of the term is given in detail. We discuss this in detail in our program. Please visit our site. But of course this chart is a summary of the detail, listing out what are the activities and each of this Incoterms, and who is going to take the responsibility in each case, whether is it a seller or a buyer. As you can see in the X works basis, the seller has a minimum responsibility. If you can see in the column, in the X works column, seller is only responsible for packing, Whereas on the other end, when it comes to DDP, it is delivered duty paid. Here, the seller is going to take maximum responsibility till the item is delivered to the nominated place of a buyer. Here you can see that seller is going to also arrange export duty payment and customs formality at the importing country. So there are, this is the two extreme. X works and DDP is the two extreme, and you can see there are various intermediaries as given in the chart. Okay, so you may visit our site for further details on the program, or even reaching to me or our executive. You can use this numbers for reaching us. You can always type in your comment in the YouTube channel if you need more clarifications. And thanks for watching. Bye.